Good evening, everyone. It's a really massive pleasure to see you all this evening and joining me. My name's James. I've been a broker now for 5 years. Louise brought me on like 5 years ago now, and we've been going strong ever since. And today I really wanted to present something that's particularly I find really fun in broking, and that is using equity to help clients like yourselves build a property portfolio. So the three major things I want to talk about today is one, the actual vision of what you're trying to use a portfolio for and why you're trying to build a property portfolio, because there's many different ways to invest and property is one exceptional way to do it. Well, I think so at least. I want to talk about equity and actually using equity in your property to actually save you from having to front the cash for a lot of things, as well as I want to talk about certain tips when it comes to the lenders that we deal with and discussing all the ins and outs of talking and presenting with lenders. So first and foremost, everyone, I just want to make a quick disclaimer that this is all general information. If you are looking for a more thorough conversation about your in particular lending requirements or needs, feel free to book a meeting with myself or Louise, and we're more than happy to have a chat and discuss. So, why property? Why does it work, and why should we invest in property? Well, property for the most part is a very tangible asset. It is stable, and usually, for the most part, it is an appreciating asset. The best thing about investing with property is that you can use your equity in your current home to purchase a new investment property without actually having to front a lot of the cash yourself. So all of you, maybe way back when or more recently, when you purchased your first property, you had to save, you had to beg or borrow to get that initial deposit. And over time, as that property has grown, you can now actually use what you've built in your home to purchase something more. This allows you obviously to leverage large assets with a smaller deposit overall. So holding property for a longer time typically results in good capital growth. It means essentially you're gaining more money over time in the long and short of it. However, keep in mind the length of time you do need to hold property to really see some large capital growth can be very determined of the area that you purchased in. And I want to talk about that briefly today. But usually what you want to see is you're not really holding a property for 2 years to get a large amount of growth. You're looking at 5, 10, 15 years down the line as an investment. Rental income does help cover the cost of the loan and the holding costs. Keep in mind, if you are looking to invest for the first time, there are multiple costs besides the mortgage you have to consider. But negative gearing may also help reduce your taxable income and the cost that exceeds rent. And that's a great question to have for your accountant. Obviously, the goal overall when it comes to having multiple properties is for that passive income and possibly at the end of the day, financial freedom. We've had many clients with 4, 5, some even 6 investment properties, and the freedom that they get with having such a large portfolio and eventually paying it all down the loans is that they've got the opportunity now with either their young or growing families to do much more in life. And it's great to see them either doing that extra holiday trip or having that bit of extra time at family and home and have to downsize their jobs and their work commitments, which is a lot of the time is the biggest factor that we're doing this all for. So equity. A lot of people know about equity, but I want to go over in detail in case you're very new to the investment scene. When you purchase your first home, say for example, you purchase it for $500,000. Over time, your property typically will increase in value while you pay down your loan. The difference between your value of your home and the loan that you have is actually the equity we can get access to. You don't need to sell your house to access this equity. A lot of you have done an investment either with myself or Louise, or maybe a different broker or your bank, and we can access that without needing to sell your home, I should say. So as a broker, what we can do is we can help structure your loans by refinancing you and releasing equity to draw on for investments. Can all be all sorts of investments, like I said, but particularly in this case, we're going to look at property. A good example of that is if your home is worth now about $900,000 and you have a loan about $500,000, we can access equity around $240K, which is based on an 80% loan to value ratio. That is particular in case, that is a very important factor to note. We can only draw up to 80% of the value of the property, lender specific and all sorts of other variables in place, but 80% of the value of the property is typically what we can access.
We can go higher, but
we
you
can
will
go
pay
higher.
lenders more in the future.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah.
And this can typically cover stamp duty and even some other costs with a $600,000 purchase for an investment purchase. A good way to start off is initially getting your pre-approval sorted. So approaching a broker or one of us in particular, we can help you actually get a pre-approval in order, get that deposit out there and get you organized to purchase a new investment. So you've got some confidence when you do approach a lot of vendors.
James, I just want to interrupt one thing. With that deposit, it's better to get your deposit out first because people often say, oh, well, why do I need that? The bank will just give me a pre-approval. Because when you actually purchase, you need to pay your 5 or 10% when you actually buy, not when you settle. And people often are confused by that. They go, oh, well, my bank just said I just need a pre-approval, but you don't. You actually do need part of a deposit available. And the preference is you don't use your cash, you use the loan because that makes it cleaner as a more tax deductible entity for that. So just saying, there you go.
Exactly right, everyone. And yeah, like I
Okay.
touched on briefly, getting that little bit of equity out for that deposit and those purchases. And I'm going to touch on again in a case study in a moment. We're going to talk about interest-only loans. They're great to help reduce repayments and improve your cash flow in the early years of the loan as well. I want to discuss them as well. Principal interest loans, though, may suit you long-term with a focus on actually reducing your debt over the initial years as well. Having offset accounts in this particular case, I want to talk about, which is key. Having an offset account initially when you get your equity released, as you're not using those funds initially, it needs to sit somewhere. We can put it in a lot of different accounts, but having an offset account against the loan, you know exactly where the money's for, what it's from, and you have it at your fingertips ready. So when you do need to pay that deposit, you can access it straight away. Fixed and variable rates. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about rates dropping at the moment. And if you do have questions at the end, I'm more than happy to talk about rates. At the moment, fixed rates aren't particularly the most favorable in the market, but we are seeing a lot of competition in variable rates and where we're seeing a lot of clients wanting to move towards. So, what I want to talk about more importantly is when it comes to getting an investment property, a lot of people go, do I get the principal and interest mortgage or should I go interest only? And there are definitely pros and cons to both. Pros is you do see in the between up the top here, there is a lower rate when it comes to a principal interest rate. Typically, we're seeing around the 5.85% in the market at the moment. Some a little lower, some a little higher, depending on the lender. In comparison to interest only rates sitting around 6.04%. Again, some lower, some higher, depending on the lender. It helps you build equity, a principal interest rate, because you are now paying off that loan rather than having it sit as a stagnant loan without paying down the principal that you would in an interest-only loan. It is stronger for serviceability. They are more favorable depending on your scenario, and they're usually easier to refinance, but they do have higher monthly repayments to keep in mind, less negative gearing benefits because you are slowly paying down and slower to save for your next deposit. On the flip side of that, as far as an interest-only loan goes, there is lower monthly repayments, so improved cash flow. So if you're thinking about cash flow, in fact, I had a call today about this question. A client was seeking to look at seeing a interest-only loan versus his current principal and interest loan on one of his investments, and we're going to have that discussion later to improve his cash flow momentarily because he's got a new kid on the way, and he wants to see if he can. He's nervous because first child does help a lot. When there is 100% of repayment is tax deductible for negative gearing, particularly if your accountant has looked into certain strategies that may benefit you as far as your negative gearing. Again, great question to have for your accountant. Frees up some cash for renovations or other purchases. And like I said, the flexibility to switch to principal and interest later, we can do that for you like at a drop of a finger. Keep in mind though, like I said, there are higher rates. You don't get that equity build up from paying off the loan. There can be some payment shock when it reverts to P&I when that repayment does increase, even though the rate does reduce, and can lower your borrowing capacity a bit long term. And we can discuss a little bit more personally if you'd like to discuss. Keep in mind though, I know I've just said two different rates, but to give you an indication, I wrote these figures down for a principal and interest loan for around $500,000. The repayment looks to be about $2,947 versus an interest-only loan, which is $2,500. So it's a $400 difference a month in repayment. So you got to keep in mind there is a difference, and that can be quite substantial depending on your cash flow position at the time. Another really important thing, and this is a really particularly important thing I want everyone to take away, so do take some notes. Lenders are very driven by their policies and they change all the time. As you know, when having interviews with us, we talk about, oh, one lender particularly likes you for X, Y, Z, another lender doesn't. Say, for example, some lenders will only take up to 75% of an investment property's income, while other lenders will take up to 90%. So some lenders may initially, they say, oh, we've got the lower interest rate and we'll treat you right. However, you won't be able to actually borrow as much with them as you will with another lender. Certain banks also apply higher default living.
Sorry, just on that too. That's really important because people often come to us and say, oh, I saw XYZ lender and they've got this really cheap rate for blah, blah for investors. Yeah, but the trouble is they have that because they're not letting you lend as much as you would think. So that's really how the income is treated, can be quite dramatic, quite varied too. And
Um,
some lenders will lend up to 100% of rental income, but it's pretty rare.
yeah, it's pretty rare, and there are a few exceptions in those lenders when it comes to a few other policies they may get you on. I will keep in mind certain banks also take into example higher living expenses than others. Some like really treat HECS debt, for example, for young investors quite harshly. Credit card limits, especially investment property costs. Some will really hammer you on the investment property costs, others included in your natural servicing, or they include it, or they give you 10% of the rental income, which can make a world of difference when it comes to applying for an investment loan. And private school fees can be very aggressive with some lenders. So keep in mind the difference that we've seen in a lot of these opportunities. It's a difference to $100 to $250,000, depending on the lender and what they're willing to offer you, depending on their criteria and what they assess. Which, like I said down here, it could be the difference between one or two investment properties at the end of the day. And obviously, if you want to start aggressively expanding your portfolio, having two is better than one, but it's always good to start with one and see how you go as well. So we can guide you on the best course of action when it comes to not so much as far as a save you a bit of money long term, but structure your loans correctly in that regard. How to choose a good property is also a very important part of choosing an investment. As much as we are not buyers agents, we do have some knowledge in the realm. Location is massively important. Thinking about schools, infrastructure, transportation, and just the local amenities. If you want something that's going to tick all these boxes, which will be a high value property for renters, these are the kind of things you need to keep in mind. If you're going to try and rent out a property in the sticks, it's probably not going to track the highest amount of rental yield or maybe even the particular rental client that you're after.
That's true. I had a client once who bought this property outside of Noosa, which was a two-bedroom on several acres. And he said, oh, it's an ideal property, he thought, because he wanted it for himself. But then he was trying to rent it out. And no one wanted it because if you wanted land, you wanted more than two bedrooms. You wanted a family home if you wanted land. So no one was renting it. And he was like, this is a dog of a property and it won't work for investment. And that was true. It was a dog. So you've got to really meet your market with what's expected by tenants in the area, not just what you want in the area.
So a really good way of doing that if you are looking at investment, talk to real estate agents as well. See what kind of portfolios they've got in an area is not a bad one, and it's a free tip because obviously they want your business if they're going to be able to rent your property. So having a chat with local real estate agents can be really helpful. If not, a buyer's agent can be exceptionally helpful as far as finding you a nice rental property. So looking for areas in high demands, low vacancy rates, again, and solid tenant portfolios, all these things, like I said, that I've listed here, choosing the properties with low maintenance.
And a low vacancy rate is usually between 2 to 3%, something under that. We used to be under 5, but now most vacancy rates are good quality areas can be much lower. And you can find them on a website called SQM Research. And SQM has free vacancy rate data on every suburb in Australia, and it's well worth having a look at. It's run by Louis Christopher, who's an old agent, and here's some great information there for you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's multiple tools out there to look into when it comes to finding the area that may suit you. For one, the broadest appeal, but also the highest profitability, hopefully, at the end of the day for that return. The main thing is, though, this is an investment property, so you can avoid that emotional decision. This is unlikely to be your forever home that you're going to purchase. If it is something you want to move into down the line, that may be a different story. However, you want to look at the statistics rather than finding the emotional property with the white picket fence or the nice big tree out the front. So keep those things in mind. You also want to consider the long-term capital growth in the area, as well as the short-term yield, depending on your goals and what you're trying to achieve. If you want to look at long-term growth, there are lots of different tools out there where there are expected growth in a lot of areas. Obviously, there's the key staples, areas with lots of schools and amenities, or there's particular growth going on in those areas. But also looking in the future development plans and zoning and market cycles as well is really important. If you do know if there is future development plans, asking around what that area looks like to be doing in the next 5 to 10 years is not a terrible idea.
You
So,
can Google public infrastructure development in an area and private infrastructure development in an area, and both of those will generate really good information on that particular suburb for you generally. And you want to look at are Bunnings or Aldi growing in these areas so that you can see that there's a reason and other people wanting to invest there.
Particularly as well, there's a lot of train stations that are continuing to be developed and large shopping centres as well, or shopping districts, which are popping up. So we are seeing a lot of growth in the areas that are looking to have improved amenities in the next 2 to 3 years. What I want to draw you to quickly is a case study that I'm particularly proud of, one of my clients. So she initially bought her first property, a really modest unit for around $300,000 based in South Australia. Over the last few years, one, she's improved her career, but also the value of her property has increased over that time while she's been paying her loan down. So when she approached us to look at an investment property, it's now worth around $500,000. And she wanted to use the equity in her home to see what she get. Now, she was only thinking modestly. However, once we run the figures and whatnot, we looked like she could buy an investment property for around $1 million. To say she was blown away was an understatement, and she went out immediately and started hunting as we applied for her application. Now, she didn't buy for $1 million. She bought for much modestly than that. However, she's already messaged me. She's like, I'm looking to do my third property now already. And she's only in her early 20s. So there is a lot of potential out there for people of all age and positions to start growing a portfolio. In this case, she's done an amazing job and wants to build her future and start building a property for her. And she's, like I said, in her early 20s. And we've got, Louise, I don't know how many examples of different clients that we've done this for or we've heard this response for, and we're really proud of each and every single one of them for moving forward with that.
I'm particularly thrilled that I've got a client who had built a portfolio, and every 5 years we'd rewrite the loans and put them back to interest only because he was growing a family and they didn't want to pay down those investment loans. And now his home's totally debt free and they have 5 investment properties with the debt's only 50% of the whole portfolio. And you'd think, oh my God, how long has this taken? But it's built over 15 years and now it's sort of all sitting there doing its thing. So it's amazing. And he says that this next 5 years and then he'll just can sell them and retire on it. No problem. Yeah, debt free. It's marvelous, and live off the rent. You've got to be able to hold through the hard times though. That's the key thing.
Yeah, you got to stick strong. So speaking of that, the common mistakes to avoid is waiting too long to start is a big one. If you're thinking about having these conversations that you want to start investing, don't wait another 5 to 10 years. The position will change. Starting sooner rather than later and getting that knowledge sooner rather than later. So I'm glad you're all here as well. So overstretching your budget especially, keep in mind a lot of this, everything we do, and my clients know when they speak to me and Louise, when they speak to her, is that everything we do is for lifestyle. You got to not overstretch your budget. We want you to still enjoy your life like a glass of wine when listening to a little talk or a cup of tea. We want you to enjoy your lifestyle, so don't try and overstretch your budget because at the end of the day, all this should be serving you, not you serving to buy investment properties. Like we mentioned earlier, please don't skip the pre-approval. That just causes way too much stress and anxiety when it comes to actually getting your loan and actually focusing on getting you through the loan first. Getting you that pre-approval can save you a lot of headaches down the line. Focusing on only on capital growth or only on yield, you really want to be focusing on both. Short term and long term, they're going to give you the best opportunities for actually building a property portfolio that has value rather than something that's going to actually decrease in some cases in value over the course of 5, 10, 15 years. Again, please don't buy based on emotion. This is an investment opportunity. No matter what investment you do, you should say, you should never be purchasing based on emotion. Always stick to your guns and seek the best as far as information on investments as you can. And not reviewing your loans. I could not say this more thoroughly. Please review your loans at least every 2 years. See what the market is doing because things do change and banks don't often change your loans for you. Obviously, a lot of our clients, you guys know that we look after you as best we can and consistently throughout the lifetime of your loan. But even then, we will call you up and say, we think we can do a bit better. And if that call comes, we typically can. Keep that in mind. Thank you for everyone actually submitting your questions. I know I covered most of them, but there was one in particular that did come up that I wanted to have a chat about now, which is property in super and particularly with Division 296, what's coming. So many of you would have seen in the news from July 1st, any balances of super over 3 million will attract an additional 15% tax on their earnings, lifting it to the 30% rate for tax on super. Keep in mind, this is for all properties that are currently held in your super. This will affect. If your portfolio, including what your super is over 3 million, this is when the tax will start to kick in. At the moment, this will affect about 80,000 Australians as of July 1st. However, if you are planning on investing in your super and you're worried about this, keep in mind there are other options. There are a variety of other options. You can hold them on your own name. You can hold property in trust. There are options out there. So please do ask. Otherwise, we can refer you to a specialist in certain fields who can help navigate how to set up to protect yourself as far as property investments, either even onshore or offshore as well. Actually, what we're seeing is a lot of Australians now trying to buy property in Indonesia and Bali in particular. So that's something to keep in mind.
One of our clients is a buyer's agent in France and Italy too. So
Yes. So there are lots and lots of opportunity out there. You just need to know who to ask. And we may not know every single answer on the sun, but we will find the answers for you, and we work very hard on doing so. So, if you are interested in actually getting yourself an investment property, keep in mind you got to get your finance in order. You need to understand what your borrowing capacity really is. You best apply for a pre-approval or just book a strategy session and see where you can go, either with a broker, a financial advisor. There are many people to book a strategy call with. Obviously, when it comes to sorting your loans out, we're probably the most ideal team to talk to. So, that's really it from me. If you do have any questions, please feel free to chat. If you would like to book a call, my QR code's right there. I'm more than happy to discuss with you anything loan related regarding your own scenario, or if you just want to swing by a future scenario, please let me know and I can discuss any questions you've got.
so don't hesitate to ask us. We'll always have a go for you.
Thank you,
Thank you
guys. Have
all
a
for
great
coming.
evening.